This is a collection of real-life horror stories. These stories are told by various different people who personally experienced paranormal events. Story 1. A Girl and Her Dog. My dad is a photographer, and one time he stayed at this hotel up in Vermont for a shoot. He was woken up in the middle of the night when a little white dog ran through his room. Shortly after that, a young girl, about 7 or 8 years old, came into his room in pursuit of the dog. She sat at the foot of his bed and asked if he had seen her dog. He says he wasn't scared. It was just a normal little girl, but there was still something about the whole thing that felt supernatural. My dad told her it had run into the bathroom, and if she was lost and needed to find her parents. She said no, got up, and followed the dog into the bathroom. My dad went in to help her get the dog, but when he got in there the room was empty. Then a few weeks later, his assistant was staying in the same room with her sister. Weirdly, both of them had the same dream about their dad coming into the room, sitting on the edge of their bed, then going into the bathroom. When they woke up the next morning, they got a call from their mother saying their dad had passed away that night. Story 2. The Faceless Figure. When I was 15 years old, I stayed up late watching a TV marathon with my sister. In the middle of the night, after my sister had fallen asleep, I saw the nearby computer mouse start moving by itself. I called my mother into the room and she said it was probably a rat that was pulling on the cable from underneath the desk, and that I should just go to sleep. Suddenly, I swear I saw a black figure with no face or human features behind the bookcase. It looked in my direction and pointed. I nearly shat myself with fear. I remember saying, "Who are you? I do not want you in my house. Nobody wants you here. Get out of here now." The thing left, and I actually heard it hit the cabinet before it just went through it. The cabinet began to sway, and the door slammed and made a loud bang. Story 3. Evil Doppelganger. Late at night I usually go to the bathroom multiple times, but for the past 4 days, every time I go to leave, I can see myself still standing in the mirror from the corner of my eye. It is like the other me is watching me leave the bathroom. It terrifies me to the point where I almost run out without looking directly at the mirror. I never told my husband about it because I didn't want to acknowledge it out loud. Earlier today I took a nap in our bed while he sat in the chair next to it watching TV. When I woke up he told me that he had seen me sit up and crawl backward to the edge of the bed and stand up in front of our bedroom door from the corner of his eye. He thought it was weird that I got up like that because I'm in the last month of my pregnancy, and I can't really move so well without it hurting, so he tried talking to me. When I didn't answer he looked at the door to find me not there and still sleeping in bed. I got really creeped out and I finally told him about what I have been seeing in the bathroom. He thought it was creepy as well but didn't want to really talk about it anymore because he thinks it will give whatever it is power or energy. I have no idea what it wants or why we both saw it. Story 4. The Tinder Date. I went on a Tinder date a couple of years ago. Everything started out relatively normal. We met at a nice downtown restaurant for dinner. She was even prettier in person and the conversation was flowing. However, it didn't take long for me to realize she was a super private person. For example, she would not tell me her last name, where she worked, or say anything about her family. She made it clear that she was protecting herself, and honestly, I don't blame her. I shrugged it off and the date continued. She took great interest in the fact that I was in seminary studying to be a pastor. That was nice because usually, that's a deal breaker for most women, at least in my experience. Towards the end of our meal, she confessed something to me. "I have something to tell you," she said, "but please don't think I'm crazy." I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. She explained that she recently moved into a new apartment. She lived alone, which was also a new thing. Though she couldn't put her finger on it, she was convinced there was a presence of a sinister, and paranormal nature in her apartment. She had hardly slept since she moved in because she was plagued with constant nightmares and strange occurrences. I could see the fear and exhaustion in her eyes. She seemed quite sincere. "I can tell you're a good guy," she said. She elaborated that I seemed trustworthy and had a calming presence. "I know how this sounds, but would you please come home with me tonight? Honestly, I'm just scared to go back there alone." I was really taken aback by this. It's not every day I get asked to spend the night with a beautiful woman whom I just met. I figured she was either telling the truth or she picked a really odd way to initiate a relationship. Either way, the night would be interesting. We talked for a bit longer, and I agreed to spend the night with her. I followed her home, and when I walked into her apartment I was immediately struck with bad vibes. There was just something ominous about that place. I didn't want to freak her out, so I kept these feelings to myself. I said a quick prayer and followed her to a bedroom. We just sat there for a while, then she fell asleep. She looked like she hadn't slept in a very long time. I just sat there for a while in the silent darkness, lost in thought. Sometime later, I 100% heard someone walking down the hallway outside the bedroom. The door was closed, however, so I couldn't see anything. I was definitely frightened, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I went to investigate. Slowly I opened the door. I looked to my left, then to my right. Nothing. I walked downstairs to check out the rest of the apartment. Nothing. I went back upstairs to check the bathroom and the guest bedroom. Nothing. When I walked out of the guest room, which was right across from my date's bedroom, I looked to my left and right again. At the end of the hallway, I saw a black, humanoid body standing there perfectly still. It was almost like a shadow, but I could discern that it was a three-dimensional figure. This figure was large in stature. There's no way it could have been my date. She was maybe 5 feet 1 inch at best. I ran back into my date's room. To my horror, she wasn't in bed where I left her. I called out her name, but there was no response. I had just walked through the entire apartment, so it literally made no sense to me that she wasn't there. The bed was low to the ground, so she couldn't be under it. The closet was open too, and it was packed with boxes, so I knew she wasn't there either. The window was shut tight, plus it was the second story. It was as if she vanished. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and cell phone and ran out of the apartment in nothing but my underwear. The shadowy figure was gone. I jumped in my car and sped away. I never heard from her again. Her Tinder profile was deleted the next day, and she never responded to any of my texts. Till this day, I have no idea WTF happened that night. I also never went back to her apartment, mostly because I'm horrible with directions and she lived in the next town over. This was easily one of the most terrifying, inexplicable things I've ever experienced. Story 5. Premonition. One day I was with my friends and suddenly my head started getting heavy and my vision began to wide out to the point where I couldn't see anything at all. I immediately thought that someone could have drugged me and asked my friends to help me walk to a place where I could get some air and sit down. My sight was coming back, but I couldn't speak or express anything, couldn't respond or answer what my friends were asking. Somehow I got into a trance and it felt like I was seeing my surroundings from an above-me perspective. My friend called my mom and she picked me up. I still couldn't respond until I got home and went to the bathroom. 3 days later my mom received a call from my grandpa and I immediately knew what was going on. He told her that my dad had passed away and was found dead in his bathroom. I live with my mom and my dad used to live in another state. The forensic report showed that he died on that exact date and probably around the moment I've had that episode. Story 6. The Forest. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forests. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion, my mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it, and when one of us went in they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion we noticed the dog staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it. Like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted. And she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and stopped bothering even opening the door, until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open, and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage, because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking, I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something, and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dogs started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard, and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence, and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swinging open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk he asked me if I think the door being open that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exorcised just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there, in the forest behind our house at night. But I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. Story 7. Humanoid Figure. I am right now sitting on my front porch smoking a cigarette. I cannot bring myself to go back inside my house. There is someone in there. Just over 2 months ago I moved into a new house after losing nearly everything to COVID. I won't go into details or draw this out. Typing this out is making my eyes well and every hair on my body stand straight up. But god damn it, I saw a human-shaped shadow in my walk-in closet. Am I going crazy? Maybe, but I know that I am not at the same time. Okay, this is what happened. I am laying in my bed browsing the internet, and from the corner of my eye I catch movement coming from my closet. Within literal milliseconds I turn and see someone standing inside of it, looking right at me. You guys. I flipped the fuck out, sprung up, ran out of my room, slammed the door, and grabbed a kitchen knife. I yelled and screamed about calling the police, that I had a knife, and basically acted like a scared monkey. No response. After about a minute of yelling and realizing I had left my phone in my bedroom, to call 911, I slowly peeked in. There was simply nothing there, you guys. Nothing. No one could have gone anywhere. I'm fucking pissed and terrified about this. I saw this person. I saw their shape. Their movement. Their arms. There was a humanoid figure in my closet, and that is all I know. I don't know what to do from here. Story 8. The Black Man. This past year my family went on a sabbatical in another country. My daughter, 4, talks a lot about returning to our old house, and something she said recently gave me chills. Daughter, when we go back, can I sleep in Mommy's room? Me, no backbone. Yes, sometimes we can have sleepovers. But don't you remember, you have a huge bed to sleep in your room. All your toys are in there. Your stuffed animals. Daughter, but that guy, remember, I wake up at night because he's there with me. Me, mentally freaking out. What? No, I don't remember. What man? Daughter, he sits in the corner. He's all black, he doesn't talk, he just sits by me. Me. What does his face look like? Daughter, he has no eyes, but I think he has a mouth. Me, in shock. Well, you can definitely sleep in my room. Story 9. Mother. When my sister Betsy and I were kids, our family lived for a while in a charming old farmhouse. We loved exploring its dusty corners and climbing the apple tree in the backyard. But our favorite thing was the ghost. We called her Mother, because she seemed so kind and nurturing. Some mornings Betsy and I would wake up, and on each of our nightstands, we'd find a cup that hadn't been there the night before. Mother had left them there, worried that we'd get thirsty during the night. She just wanted to take care of us. Among the home's original furnishings was an antique wooden chair which we kept against the back wall of the living room. Whenever we were preoccupied, watching TV or playing a game, Mother would inch that chair forward, across the room, toward us. Sometimes she'd manage to move it all the way to the center of the room. We always felt sad putting it back against the wall. Mother just wanted to be near us. Years later, long after we'd moved out, I found an old newspaper article about the farmhouse's original occupant, a widow. She'd murdered her 2 children by giving them each a cup of poisoned milk before bed. Then she hung herself. The article included a photo of the farmhouse's living room, with a woman's body hanging from a beam. Beneath her, knocked over, was that old wooden chair, placed exactly in the center of the room. Story 10. The Strange Man from My Childhood. As more years pass and as I keep finding more and more things from my childhood, I begin to remember more and more strange things that I experienced as a kid. Honestly, one of the strangest had to be the experience I'm about to tell you. It started when I was 5 years old. One night, once I knew both my parents were asleep, I snuck out of my bedroom and went into our reading room, which was where our front door was. While I was out there, I couldn't help but to just stare out the window. I don't know why, but I just got this strong urge, that completely came out of nowhere, to look out the window. Once I looked, I saw a man standing in our front yard. He had to have been at least 8 feet tall, and he wore a black suit with a black top hat, and his hair was silvery white colored. I could tell right away that he definitely wasn't human just by his skin and his teeth. His skin was pure white. Every time I saw him, he always just stood there, smiling at me. His smile revealed rows of yellowish white, razor-sharp, jagged teeth. I could remember staring at the man for a bit longer before walking towards the front door and sneaking onto the front porch. The next thing I know, I'm laying on the sidewalk in front of our front yard. I seemed to be fine. I looked towards the front yard again, but the man was gone. A few seconds later, all I see is our neighbor looking down at me. He knocked on our door and told my parents about where he found me. Ever since that night, throughout my childhood, I've seen the same man. The strangest thing is that he only ever appeared to me before something bad happened. He'd appeared to me before one of my relatives would die. When I was 12, he followed me home from school just an hour before my friend came to me and told me someone almost kidnapped her. When I turned 14, he seemed to have stopped appearing to me. To this day, I still haven't seen him, and I always wonder if I'll ever see him again. Story 11. My Grandma's House. My grandma's house has always, for as long as I can remember, been a scary place. My dad and aunt and uncle all grew up in the house and had paranormal experiences occur throughout their lives. One example was when my dad and uncle were teenagers. My uncle was walking down the steps and was swinging a towel, as he had just washed his hair. Out of nowhere, my dad, who was standing in the living room at the bottom of the stairs, saw the towel straighten out in front of my uncle as if someone pulled it, and my uncle fell forcefully down the stairs. Now, my grandma hates all things paranormal, especially Ouija boards, so it is a big no-no in our family to discuss the paranormal events that occur in her house. 20 years or so ago, my cousins and brothers were playing in the upstairs bedrooms of my grandparents' house. The toys were set up in the room across the hall from them, and they were all in the same bedroom playing a board game. Out of nowhere, a Hot Wheels car, no batteries, no wind-up, just an average Hot Wheels car, slowly exited the room that the toys were in, went across the hall and into the room where they were all sitting. Needless to say, they were all terrified. Around 8 years ago, my oldest brother moved into the basement of their house. One night when he was home alone, he woke up out of a deep sleep, having felt like he was shaken by someone. He stood up and instantly smelled gas. He went upstairs and outside of the house. Later he found out there was a carbon monoxide leak, and if he had not woken up, there's a big chance he could have died in his sleep. Months after that, when my grandparents were away for the weekend, the family decided to try the Ghost Radar app in their house. We all sat around the phone and my uncle asked the normal questions. Is anyone here? Blah blah. Then he asked, who used to live in the basement? At this point my brother had moved out. The ghost radar replied with my brother's full first name, which no one ever calls him. We were shocked. So my uncle asked, how did you save my brother? It replied with, wake. WTF. He then asked, what did you save him from? And it said gas. Needless to say, we were shocked. The last thing that I'm going to talk about that happens in the house is my great-grandma's belongings, who passed away probably 30 years ago, will show up in their kitchen every month or so. They put the things back in the basement, and a little while later it will show back up in the kitchen. Story 12. My friend Bosco. I was 10 to 11 years old when this started. My brother was 4 to 5. Like a lot of kids, Kyle too had an imaginary friend. And like most kids with imaginary friends, Kyle had given him a name with distinctive physical features. If I remember correctly, the friend's name was Bosco. Bosco was short, pudgy, and had a gray beard. My parents thought it was a bit strange that Kyle's imaginary friend would be an adult man, but they didn't dwell on it too much. Bosco quickly became a part of our daily routine. While getting ready for school, Kyle would insist that I needed to stop hogging the mirror as Bosco had to fix his hair and beard. At breakfast, and lunch and dinner, the chair next to Kyle was to be left unoccupied because that's where Bosco would sit. My parents were just grateful that he didn't ask for an extra platter to be prepared, as Bosco did not eat. He just wanted to sit there to keep Kyle company. Bosco would make his presence felt at school too. Kyle's teacher once called my mom how impressed she was with Kyle's quickly expanding vocabulary. He was learning new words, and when asked, he would say his friend Bosco had said them to him. I remember this one instance when a new family moved into our neighborhood. Their kid was Kyle's age. Mom took us over to say hello to them. I remember Kyle shook the other kid's hand and said rather clearly, "I'm very pleased to make your acquaintance." The other kid just started. My mom struggled not to look smug. My dad wasn't all that interested in Kyle's friend, or in anything else his kids did for that matter. So it was mostly my mom and I who got to hear about how nice and fantabulous Bosco was. Then came the incident that made us rethink just how imaginary Bosco really was. One day, Kyle and I were waiting at the bus stop just outside of school for Mom to pick us up. This place always had a lot of parents and kids around, so it was safe. Suddenly, Kyle began pulling on my arm, telling me he wanted to go to the store across the street and get a candy bar. I told him we could get one when Mom got there, but he just wouldn't listen. He pulled on my arm almost frantically and kept saying he needed a candy bar now. I gave in and walked with him to the store, all the while telling him if Mom got mad at us, it would be his fault. The moment we had crossed the street, the driver of a bus lost control of the vehicle and mowed down a bunch of people at the bus stop. It was like a scene from a movie. I was in a state of shock while Kyle started crying. When my mom got there, she hugged us for what seemed like an eternity. She knew we could have been among the people who were crushed. Once we had gotten home and had calmed down, she asked me why we had crossed the street. I told her about Kyle wanting a candy bar. She questioned Kyle, who told her he didn't really want a candy bar. Bosco did. And he's the one who told Kyle to get me to go to the store with him. My mom turned pale. For some time after that, life went on as usual. Mom now asked Kyle about Bosco quite regularly. But he didn't say anything out of the ordinary, just regular kid stuff. But another surprise for us was right around the corner. My mom's sister, our Aunt Rita, had just moved to our town. She had landed a job at the same company where Dad worked. And I remember that she and my dad got along very well. One weekend, my mom took us to see our maternal grandparents. Dad said he couldn't come as he had work. Mom seemed disappointed but agreed to take us without him. Nana and Papa too were impressed at how articulate Kyle was becoming, and listened with great interest about his new friend Bosco. The next afternoon, we were all sitting in the living room. I was playing with my grandparents' dog. Mom and her parents were talking while Kyle was fiddling with the TV remote. He switched to a channel where the movie Ghost was playing. The famous pottery scene, you know which one, was on. Mom instantly grabbed the remote and changed the channel to Cartoon Network. Kyle was upset. He demanded to know why he couldn't watch the movie. Mom explained to him that he could watch it when he was older and that it wasn't appropriate for kids to watch grown-ups hug each other like that. Kyle argued some more and Mom again told him he wasn't old enough. He pouted and in sheer exasperation asked why it was okay for Dad and Aunt Rita to hug like that in his bed. Mom was taken aback and asked what he was talking about. Kyle told her that Dad and Aunt Rita would get naked and hug in his bed. Just like in the movie, when we were at school and Mom was at work. Once or twice a week, Dad would come home for a while and he and Aunt Rita would hug in Kyle's bed, and then get dressed and leave. Mom was outraged and asked why he was making up such a disgusting story. Kyle insisted that he didn't make it up. Bosco had told him. Bosco also said that Aunt Rita was hugging Dad right then even as they spoke. Mom's gaze turned cold. She told our grandparents she was going home. She drove back to our house in a hurry. I deduced that Aunt Rita really was there because Mom came back later that night with more of our stuff and said that we'd be staying with Nana and Papa for a while. My parents were divorced by the end of that year. Story 13. Hello. This happened when I was 15. I was house sitting for my grandma one weekend while she went to Florida with some of her church friends. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom next to her room. The guest bedroom always had 2 twin beds inside of it that my brother and I would sleep in when we had sleepovers at her house. I took the bed next to the window, but before getting into bed, I checked all the doors, making sure they were locked. When I did get into bed, it was early and I didn't actually go to sleep for a while. There wasn't much to do at my grandma's house. I was just on my phone for an hour or two, watching videos, texting people, whatever. That's when I thought I could start hearing someone's voice outside. It sounded like a woman's voice saying hello. I left the bedroom and inched my way closer to the front door, moving slowly because I was trying to listen. Hello? It was a woman's voice just saying hello. Like every 10 seconds. As I got closer to the front door, I realized that's where it seemed to be coming from. My grandma's door doesn't have a peephole, but the windows in her dining room gave a clear view of the front porch. So I went over to that window to attempt to get a view of who was out there. I tried peeking my head in between the plastic blinds without making it obvious, but I guess I didn't do a good job of that. Because when I looked, I did see a woman on my grandma's stoop and she was looking right at me, as if she knew I was going to be looking through those blinds. Once again, she said hello with some freakish smile on her face. This woman was older, but don't picture her as some innocent-looking small old lady. She looked like she was maybe late 50s, early 60s, and something about her face just creeped me out. I moved away from the window and thought maybe it was one of my grandma's friends. It was midnight though. Why would anyone come to the door this late? And why wouldn't she knock or ring the bell? Why was she just standing out there going hello? Over and over? I was genuinely unsettled. I just went back to the guest bedroom and shut the door. Now, with the door shut as opposed to before, I couldn't hear that woman anymore. Maybe it was bad, or she just decided to leave. I started texting everyone about it, my sisters, my friends, telling them how bizarre it was. But a good amount of time passed in silence, and I was starting to calm down. My sisters were telling me to call Grandma, but there was a 0% chance she was awake, and she barely ever even checked her cell phone. Anyway, just like that, something broke the silence. A banging at the window. Not knocking or tapping, banging. I felt that fierce pain in my chest area as my body entered that fight or flight mode. Shortly after the banging stopped, I heard that familiar voice say hello. With that boost of adrenaline, I guess I had the extra confidence to grab the blinds and push it up. There I was, face to face with this horrifying older lady with only a thin layer of glass between us. I screamed at her smiling, gross face, calling the cops. I pulled the blind back down and ran back outside to the living room. I looked around the house, then ran upstairs to box myself into the upstairs guest bedroom. I didn't want to actually call the cops. I don't know why I wanted to just wait it out. I crawled into the bed in the upstairs guest bedroom and tucked myself under the covers. A couple of hours later, I was still awake, and I finally only then went back downstairs to look outside each window. That freaky old lady seemed to be gone. The next morning, I called my grandma and told her what happened. She started yelling into the phone, clearly panicking and distressed. She told me how a few days earlier, she was being watched in the grocery store by some woman about 10 years younger than her who just kept smiling at her for no reason. I told her to calm down. I didn't entirely know whether to correlate the two or not, but when we eventually got off the phone with each other, I did have to give it a second thought. My grandma is 75, and she has lost a bit of her wits, so I do have to take some of the things she says with a grain of salt. But the way she yelled into the phone about the woman in the store really gave me the chills. And I still wonder if it could have been the same person. Story 14. Sleep paralysis. I've suffered sleep paralysis a total of 3 times in my life. The first 2 times it just consisted of me waking up, not being able to move my body. The third time was much different though. I had woken up very early in the morning, probably between 5 and 6 a.m., when the sun was just starting to come up. There was light in the room, but barely any. I tried to move, but I had that unfortunately familiar feeling of paralysis. Helplessness, my eyes fixated on the wall. There was nothing I could do. Then suddenly I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs of my bedroom. It was my brother, followed by my sister, dad, and mom. They were all sobbing hysterically, and they all seemed to be at least a foot taller. It was unnerving. The 4 of them approached my bed, then stopped at the bedside, towering over me, all 4 of them crying. I couldn't move. I wanted to cry for help or just yell at them to stop because they were scaring me. Their heights, they looked like they were near to hitting the ceiling. Then, just as quickly as they entered, all 4 of them turned and walked back down the stairs. I could move again, and so I ran down the stairs to follow them, but they weren't in the outside area. I went to each of their rooms one at a time. All 4 of them were fast asleep. My heart was racing because the most surreal, unnerving thing just happened to me. I had to lean on the wall to gather my thoughts for a second, breathing heavily. Falling back asleep was futile. The rest of the night I lay awake until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I was struck by a speeding car when crossing the road with friends and ended up with 3 broken bones and a fractured thigh bone. I was hospitalized for a week, and at one point all 4 of my family members stood next to my hospital bed looking down at me, my mom being emotional and crying. It was almost the same image from my sleep paralysis. I'm not superstitious at all, but if I were, I would 100% believe that dream was some kind of sign or some kind of prediction of the future. Story 15. The Cemetery. When I was 16, my friend Sean, who was a big goofball, came over to chill in our basement, as he often would during the summer. I remember he had a Coke bottle in his hand, and I was eating Wendy's when he said we should check out that creepy cemetery across town. It was the worst idea ever, and I even told him that. Still, we had no school the next day, and I knew exactly which cemetery he was talking about. I don't know if one should even call it a regular cemetery. It was a large plot of land with maybe 1,000 tombstones at most. The tombstone was very archaic looking, and any time we passed, there were no signs of anyone having come to visit within the last 2 decades. It was very old. It had been closed 10 years ago. The site probably dated back centuries, and it had this super creepy vibe to it because it was closed off by a gothic metal fence, and it was surrounded by woods on two sides, and some old abandoned building was at the center of it. Everything about it just gave scary vibes. Many people had reported weird sightings and strange sounds coming from the graves. Almost everyone in town had their own personal story of the place. Some of them were obviously exaggerated. Two of the best stories I've heard from my family were from my uncle and grandma. My uncle had once heard someone screaming for help while he was driving near that place. He stopped, got out of the car, and heard the scream again. He said it was coming from inside one of the graves near the wire, and he quickly left. My grandma had once seen a lady dressed in white clothes slowly waving her hand at her. We'd also heard many rumors about that place. Like some people would go there at 3 a.m. to perform satanic rituals and other weird stuff. Some people had reported seeing smoke rising from deep within the cemetery at midnight. It took a little persuading, but Sean managed to get me to want to check it out, too. I always wanted to visit that place after hearing so many creepy stories, but was too scared to even attempt it. I previously never had any paranormal experiences in my life, and always wanted to see something crazy. We woke up the next day at 4 a.m. and left at 4:30 before anyone figured out what we were up to. Ironically, it was a very cloudy, foggy kind of day. I guess conveniently adding to the mood. Sean pulled up his Honda to the side of the road. I told him to pull up more so it wasn't obvious. This was a low-traffic road, so it would look kind of suspicious. He pulled up a few hundred feet down the road, and we got out and cut through the woods so that any potential passing traffic wouldn't see us entering the huge cemetery. The forest was full of fog. It looked like a scene from a horror movie. I started having second thoughts, but we had already made it this far. Hopping the fence in the woods was easy. It was maybe a 3 or 4 foot fence. Sean kind of took the lead on this, since it was mainly his venture. We finally reached the cemetery. The place was looking as creepy as ever because of the fog. We couldn't see that far away. He led me through the eerie plot of land, and we looked at the archaic tombstones. They all seemed to be from the 19th century. The writing on some of them was illegible at that point. I know it sounds super cliché, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched constantly. I started looking around the surrounding woods. I kept getting scared by trees. They looked like people in the fog. My mind was playing tricks on me. I was prepared for jump scare. I told Sean how creepy this was. "I know," he replied, still with the feeling of being watched. We kept walking deeper into the cemetery. We hadn't seen anything weird. My fear started to go away. Maybe this was just another quiet, depressing place, I thought. We walked further, and we could see an outline of a huge abandoned building. We had reached the center of the cemetery. As soon as I realized this, I started getting a bad feeling. My chest felt heavy. Fear filled my body for no apparent reason, but we kept moving. Sean wanted to look inside the building and then leave, he promised me. The closer we got to the building, the more sick I felt. I almost felt like passing out. I told him to go alone and make it quick. I sat next to the grave to catch my breath, and he continued forward, leaving me alone. It had been a few minutes since he went inside. I was starting to feel better and thought about following him inside. I hadn't even fully gotten up when I saw a person walking just 6 graves away. I froze for a moment and quickly hid behind a tombstone. I slowly peeked at him. He was definitely not Sean. He was a lot taller, wearing a hooded black cloak. He looked like he was in his 50s. He walked towards a grave and stopped at its foot, just a few feet away from where I was. He had his back turned towards me. He was speaking. It wasn't English. It was another language. A weird one. Like he was speaking in English but backwards. It sounded extremely creepy. Who was this guy? Maybe one of the people who was involved in one of the alleged rituals? What he did next scared the F**k out of me. He pulled a shovel out of nowhere and started digging into the grave, while shouting in his weird language. I got scared and stopped speaking. I didn't know if this person would harm us or not if he knew we were here. Maybe he was armed. I got scared for Sean. He didn't know there was a lunatic out here. I wanted to leave that damn place like a flash, but I couldn't leave Sean alone. I stared desperately at the rotting building while the crazy screams got louder and weirder. Like he was trying to summon something or cast a spell. I just thought he was mentally ill. Then I saw Sean sneak out of the building. He had heard the screams. He gestured to me to come towards him. We carefully met midway, hiding through the graves and then without saying a word to each other, ran like lunatics. The screams faded into the fog. We didn't say anything until we hopped the fence and got back into the car. Sean looked more scared than me. He basically put it in drive before the car even had a chance to fully start. After a few seconds, he was finally able to tell me what he had seen. When Sean was inside that abandoned building, he found a sigil of Baphomet painted on the wood floor, which is basically the sign of Satan. Around it were a bunch of freaky dolls with buttons for eyes. He saw rooms full of weird freakish dolls and other satanic symbols which were practically everywhere. He didn't get to see anything else in the building because he heard the screams. We told this story to everyone and got scolded by our parents. Many people thought we were lying after a group of adults, after hearing our story, went to investigate the building and found it completely empty. They just found some leftover pieces of dolls. I was shocked. Sean was never the same after he left the cemetery. He no longer acted goofy and fearless. He was more serious and quiet now. I think Sean saw something in there. Something more than just dolls and satanic symbols. Something he still hasn't told me. Story 16. Hide and Seek. I heard it from a patient. It was really long ago. I'm going to tell the story of how he told it. He is currently inside a psych facility. It all started a few months ago. My cousins would play hide and seek in my room. Well, my room was kind of large. We used to play after turning the lights off. One day my parents were out and we were getting bored. So we decided to play this time. We would play in the entire house. Not to mention without the lights. We loved that game. So my cousins agreed. We were 5 in number. My house was small. There were only 2 bedrooms and a single bathroom. There was also a living room attached to the kitchen. I hid alone in the kitchen. One of my cousins was looking. I was pretty sure I was alone in the kitchen because I could hear my cousins whispering inside the living room. I hid inside a cupboard. I hid there for a long time. It was midsummer, so I got really sweaty. I crept out from the cupboard. I got under the table. I started fanning myself with my hands. That's when I noticed it. There was someone hiding under the table too. I wasn't scared, I thought it was my cousin. So I pat his back. Well, that's what I assumed it was. Anyways, he didn't move or look back. He felt so cold. It was quite common not to talk with one another while playing. So I just hid there until someone turned the lights on. I flinched as the sudden light really hurt my eyes. When I looked properly, my cousin wasn't there anymore. I was kind of shocked. That was barely 2 seconds max. No one can get out from under the table and leave the room that fast. My cousins came looking for me. That night while sleeping, I asked them if anybody was there with me. All of them had the same answer. They weren't. A month later maybe, I was reading in my room. I was sitting on the reading table. My parents were watching TV in the living room. I really concentrated on my studies that night. Then I heard something. Someone was sitting on my bed. I couldn't look back. I was afraid too. From the corner of my eyes I saw a boy sitting there. I should probably mention that none of my cousins were there at our house. The thing started moving close to the table. I was frozen. I couldn't talk. That thing came so close to me, I could hear it breathing behind me. With all my might I screamed my heart out. I screamed like hell that night. My parents came running in. They consoled me. I told them about the boy. They said it was in my head. I was maybe too stressed. The third event was really scary. I had gone to one of my friends' homes for group study, and was late getting back to my house. When I was only a block away from my house, I saw police cars. I started running towards them. There was a body being pulled out on a stretcher. One of my neighbors hugged me. I was kind of in shock. I asked them what happened and where my parents were. She started crying. She said that someone got inside the house. He murdered my parents with a butcher knife. I couldn't believe what I heard. I asked if they caught the man. The immediate answer from the police was that there were several witnesses that it was a boy. He somehow managed to vanish from the scene as if he wasn't even there. I asked them where he could go. He must be somewhere. A few days after my parents' funeral, I asked one of my neighbors who was an eyewitness to the murder about the boy they saw in our house. The answer was I kind of hoped it would be. According to her, she was working in her garden and got a clear view of my room. She had seen a boy standing in my room that night. He was standing near my reading table. Then he walked into the living room. He somehow found a knife. The next thing was in a frenzy. Her expression changed as if she saw a ghost. She started screaming that I killed my parents. I was the one inside the house that night. She called the cops. It's been a long time since I've been inside a cell. No one visits me. Why would they? I'm a murderer. But I know I'm not. Still to this day I see him standing in that corner near the table. He stands there and looks at me. I see the murderer of my parents in my own skin, in my own reflection. I wasn't able to verify his story, but I had heard he murdered someone when he was 13. Story 17. My Child's Ghost. About 6 years ago I moved into a maisonette which had just been purchased by my parents. I had been in that place for a couple of months and everything was fine. One night I put my 2-year-old daughter to bed. All was quiet for a while, so I did the usual, and went upstairs to check on her. She was sound asleep in her cot, but as I walked out of the room and onto the landing, I felt a breeze rush past me. It felt like someone had walked past me, and there was a very strong smell of lavender. I went downstairs, putting it down to my imagination. About 5 minutes later, I heard my daughter start talking, so I went upstairs and turned on the bedroom light. I asked my daughter who she was talking to, and she pointed to something across the room, and she said she was talking to the lady. This happened on several occasions, and sometimes in the middle of the night I would hear my daughter talking and laughing with someone. Some mornings I would go into her bedroom, and she would have glitter on her face. Around this time, a friend of mine came to visit one afternoon. When she left, she put some cigarettes on the coffee table as I had run out of them. I walked her to her car and went back inside. I remember noticing the cigarettes on the table, and I went upstairs to the toilet. On my return, the cigarettes were nowhere to be seen. There was no one else in the house at the time. My partner was still at work and my daughter was at my parents' house. I looked under the coffee table and saw that the rug underneath had been rolled up into a tube. I unraveled it to find the cigarettes inside. Obviously, my bad habits were not appreciated. Another time, myself and my partner had just gone up to bed. Our daughter was asleep and our cat was curled up at the end of the bed. Suddenly I heard the phone start to beep as though it had been left off the hook. My partner went downstairs to find that this is what had happened, but none of us had used the phone that night. Also, it was one of those phones that was attached to the wall, so it couldn't have been knocked off the hook, rather it would have had to have been lifted. If I stood at the top of my stairs, I would always get a feeling of someone rushing up the stairs past me, and out of the corner of my eye I would see a figure, but if I looked directly at it, it was never there. This went on for the first year that we lived in the maisonette. Things calmed down and for a while nothing really happened. Then we encountered a run of bad luck. I had 7 miscarriages, including losing a baby when I was 5 months pregnant, and I also lost my grandmother who I was very close to. Finally, last year I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl after having an extremely difficult and worrying pregnancy. I spent the last 2 months of my pregnancy in bed unable to walk. I remember one particularly hot summer day. I was in bed, my partner at work and my daughter at school. I burst into tears as I was so fed up. I have to point out that we had swapped bedrooms with my daughter. Anyway, I noticed in the corner of the room some lights had started to appear. For the first time in 5 years I smelt the lavender scent, and I began to hear a female voice. Although I didn't hear the voice physically, it was definitely in my head. It was a voice of a lady reassuring me that everything was fine, and it would all be over soon. At the time I was 35 weeks pregnant. The next week I gave birth to my daughter. She was 4 weeks premature but as strong as an ox. A couple of weeks later, I woke up one night and again in the same corner of the room the lights appeared. I then noticed a very tall figure bending over my baby daughter's crib. I had the feeling that the figure was smiling at her and meant her no harm. I also had the feeling that whoever this person was, they were very pleased that we finally had a healthy baby. We moved out of there a few months ago and bought our own house, but we go back to the maisonette regularly as my parents own the place and are redecorating to let it out to the next tenant. On a recent visit, my partner went up into the loft to clear out all of our Christmas decorations, old toys, baby clothes, etc. Whilst he was up there he found some old paintings which neither of us remember being up there before. He brought them down and on closer inspection they had been painted by a girl called Laura. Unfortunately, there was no date on them, but it is a mystery how they got there. Like I said before, we go back quite often and I always feel like I'm being welcomed. One night as I sat in the car as we were leaving, I looked up at our old block and I swear I saw a figure standing at the window of our old bedroom watching us leave.